Hello, I'm Jay Kelly. Welcome to my channel. This video is intended as a supplement to an earlier piece, Introduction to Handguns. There I covered some base differences between revolvers and semi-automatics, but at a fairly cursory level. This video is for those interested in further exploring revolver basics. As stated in my primary video, a revolver is a simple device to operate. You just basically open the cylinder, insert cartridges into the chambers, close the cylinder, press the trigger, bang. If it fails to go off, press the trigger again, bang. It'll most likely fire. While there are usually some internal guards to make the modern revolver drop safe and to help prevent accidental discharges, normally there are no mechanical safeties or complicated mechanisms to deal with. This makes it ideal for personal defense, especially if there's no plan for formal training or repeated range sessions to develop muscle memory. However, this also means it should never be placed where a child or someone with mental issues could gain access, as a disaster could easily occur. Now, let's look at some mechanical fundamentals. I have here an old non-functional Smith & Wesson No. 3, first introduced I think back in 1870. This particular one, as I said, is non-functional, doesn't have a hammer or a side plate. I also have a copy of a popular cowboy gun, the 1873 Colt Peacemaker, and a modern Smith & Wesson J-frame. Okay, first I want to look at grip angle. Notice how each grip starts at the trigger guard, goes back, and then curves down and around. The J-frame, the Peacemaker, very aggressive curve downward, and even the Model 3. Notice the extended trigger guard down below to protect your hand, I guess, and then goes back and then curves aggressively down and forward. Okay, this makes it kind of unique. Semi-automatics normally have a very straight grip. It comes from the back of the trigger guard, as do the others, but it doesn't go back from the trigger guard, and it goes straight down, angled back a little bit, but very straight. So a revolver grip angle is fairly unique, and I find that revolvers tend to shoot high, and it's my guess that this is partially due to grip angle and shape. It seems to result in the barrel being aimed slightly upward when the gun is held naturally in the hand. Next, let's look at the sights. The front sight is a blade that sticks up from the barrel. On the Smith & Wesson old No. 3, the cowboy gun, and even the modern J-frame. At the rear of the Smith & Wesson No. 3 is a notched tab. Let me see if I can get it on camera. There we go. All right. Very small, tiny little notched V that sticks up from the base. The J-frame has a groove that is cut in the back strap so that you look down the groove at that blade. In both cases, it is somewhat awkward to obtain a good sight alignment. The front sight stands tall and just takes over. It takes a conscious effort to bring it down into the rear sight so that it is level with the rear. Finally, normal revolver recoil causes the gun to rotate up in your hand. On follow-up shots, you need to work to bring that barrel back down into alignment. A big gun such as the No. 3, a small gun such as the J-frame, it's the same. Recoils up and you have to bring it down and get those sights back into alignment for your next shot. Now, for close-in shots, say 5 to 7 yards, this is not really significant. So for personal defense, revolvers are fine. But for accuracy to distance, they're less capable without lots of practice. Now, semi-autos do flip up on recoil, but not as much as revolvers. A lot of the recoil energy goes to driving the slide horizontally to the rear. This slide mass itself, moving rapidly to the rear, helps to counter the rotation that might otherwise occur. The slide also provides a stable base for the mounting of more significant sights than would be traditionally found on revolvers. Okay, we're going to load and make ready with a revolver. First, we need to open the cylinder. The old No. 3 is a little bit unique in that you open the top and rotate the barrel down. You do that by holding the barrel in one hand and pressing up on the locking mechanism with the thumb of the other hand. Press it up, it unlocks the barrel in the cylinder, you bring the barrel down, It lifts up a star wheel device under the cartridges and ejects any used cartridges for you. Kind of neat, but it can be a little cumbersome in actual use. Most modern revolvers work like the J-frame. On the J-frame, you have a little tab here. You press and slide the release tab and then push the cylinder from the other side. Note that just pressing the tab by accident would not release the cylinder. You need to press the tab and slide it forward, or in the Colt's case, I believe, you slide it to the rear, whichever is the appropriate direction, and then press the cylinder from the opposite side. That then rolls the cylinder out of the frame. Next, you eject the empty cartridges by tilting the barrel up and pressing the plunger rod down. This drives a star wheel similar to what I showed you on the old number 3, pushing out all cartridge cases at the same time. Then you drop in the new cartridges, close the cylinder, rolling it into a lock position, and that's it. The gun would now be ready to fire if I had actually inserted live cartridge and the trigger were pulled. Simple. Revolvers are simple to operate, simple to use, simple to fire. The mechanics of how the gun is fired get a little bit more complicated, but not for the user. They just press the trigger. As the trigger is pressed to the rear, the hammer is pushed back against the hammer spring. So watch what happens. As I pull the trigger or press the trigger back to the rear, you can see the hammer start to move, and it is pressing back against the hammer spring that is located inside the grip area. Okay, let me slide off topic just a little bit. You may hear of a hammerless revolver. I'm not really aware of any hammerless revolvers on the market. They may come with the hammer spur removed. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, again, let's look at the hammer. The hammer is actually in two pieces. This is the hammer itself right here that will slam against the firing pin that's inside the frame, mounted inside the frame. This is the spur that is used for manually cocking the gun. So what they do is they actually saw that off. And then what you have left is the hammer itself. The spur is gone. It's called a bobbed hammer. The reason for doing this is to minimize the chance of the hammer catching on something as the gun is drawn from concealment. You'll see the hammer move to the rear because the hammer is still there as the trigger is pressed, but at rest it is flushed with the frame, giving the appearance that it is a hammerless gun. The spur's gone, but not the hammer. Another variation is where they actually have a shield that comes back across and covers up the hammer and the spur. All right, and in that case, it is not visible. It's protected against snags, but again, it operates just like a standard hammer. Okay, back on topic. At the same time the hammer travels to the rear against the hammer spring, a metal hand is inserted through the frame and pushes forward and upward on the cylinder sprocket and rotates the cylinder. I'm going to try and show you this on the Smith & Wesson number 3 that doesn't have the side plate. Right where my finger is here is the hand. There we go. You can see it moving in the picture. That has, I don't know that you can see it easily there, that has a fairly sharp point on it, or a sharp edge on it, and it extends through this slot right here. And when you pull the trigger, it goes through that slot, and you can just see it reaching through the slot and going upward as I press the trigger to the rear. What that does is catch in the grooves of this section here and rotates the cylinder. So that's how the cylinder gets rotated. When you press the trigger to the rear, the hand reaches through that slot and pushes up on that little lug and that shelf and rotates the cylinder around. Next, a tab snaps up from the bottom of the frame, and you can see that right here also on the number 3. There we go. Oh, see if we can't catch it. You can see it come up right there. The tab in front goes down out of the way, allowing the cylinder to rotate, and then the tab in the rear comes up from the frame and locks the cylinder into place so that the cartridge in the cylinder will be lined up with the barrel. And that's how the cylinder, barrel, and cartridge all get locked into position, by that tab coming up from the frame and locking into the bottom of the cylinder. You will see on the cylinder itself a groove where the pressing of that tab, this is the groove from that first tab that we saw, and this is the second notch where the locking tab comes up and locks the cylinder into place. And all the modern revolvers work the same way. Okay? Once that mechanism is locked into place, the cylinder, the cartridge are lined up appropriately with the barrel. The hammer is all the way back. It is then released to slam forward and fire the round. This sequence of events is referred to as a double action trigger. The first action is the cocking of the hammer against the spring, along with the rotation of the cylinder into position. This takes a fair amount of work, which is reflected in the length of trigger travel and the pressure required to cock the gun. The second action is the slight additional pressure required to release the hammer to slam forward to fire the round. You'll notice, using the J-frame as example, first of all, the trigger position midway in the trigger guard. It has to be pulled back quite a distance, trying to do this slowly. You can see the cylinder starting to rotate. You can see the hammer coming back. You get to a certain point where the hammer is almost to the rear. Everything is kind of frozen in place, and then just slight additional pressure, slight additional rearward movement of the trigger, and the hammer is released to slam forward against the firing pin, which is located inside the frame here, to then fire the gun. You can actually feel the spot in the trigger travel where it's about to break, just before the hammer would be released. This is often referred to as the wall, because the pressure builds up to that point and then suddenly breaks, releasing the hammer to fire. With practice, you can draw the trigger back to that point, called stacking, hesitate, and then when you're ready, break the shot with just a slight additional trigger press. While not needed for close-in personal defense, most modern revolvers will also let you cock the hammer by pressing it back until it locks. Then only a slight amount of additional trigger pressure and movement is required to fire. I tried to measure the amount of pounds pressure required in double action mode for the Smith & Wesson J-frame to fire, but my gauge just wouldn't go that high. I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 12 pounds pressure. My gauge tops out at 8. However, once it's cocked, it only takes 2.5 pounds pressure to release the hammer to fire. This is a built-in safety feature. In double action mode, there really would be no accidental discharge with just a touch of the trigger. But you can pre-cock the hammer for situations where improved accuracy is needed. Some revolvers, like the 1873 Colt featured in most cowboy movies, are single action only. There is no double action mode. A single action is taken when the trigger is pressed that releases the hammer. So to fire the gun, you must first pull the hammer to the rear until it latches. Then it can be fired by pressing the trigger. To fire the next round, you must again manually pull the hammer to the rear until it latches and then press the trigger. On most guns of this nature, the trigger is held all the way back. You could just pull the hammer back and release it to fire, but it must travel all the way to rear to compress the hammer spring enough to fire the round. Now, if you're old enough, think back to the cowboy shows of the 50s and 60s. In fight scenes, you'd see the gunfighter flip the gun, almost like he was throwing bullets at the opponent. What he was actually doing was rolling the gun back on target after recoil kicked up in his hand, while holding his thumb against the hammer. So he'd fire the shot, the gun recoils back, he puts his thumb on the hammer, and then the weight of the gun rotating forward is enough to cock the hammer for the next shot, and he lets it fly. Drop safety. Old revolvers such as number 3 had a problem in that the front of the hammer was pointed and sticks through the frame where it can touch the primer of the cartridge lined up under the barrel. I'm going to try and show you that on the old number 3. There is no hammer, so I can't show you that, unfortunately, but I can show you that this is the slot where the hammer would go through. And the hammer would be pointed and would be sitting just like that with the tip of the hammer pressing up against the base of the cartridge. If the gun were dropped and something hits the hammer, or the back of the hammer, then the gun could fire. Cowboys would leave an empty chamber under the hammer to prevent that from happening. Modern revolvers have a firing pin that's separate from the hammer. It's spring-loaded so that the tip does not protrude through the frame until it is struck by the hammer. Some guns block the firing pin from being hit by the hammer until the trigger is at the rear. Others use a transfer bar. That's a flat piece of metal between the hammer and the firing pin that moves into position as the trigger goes back. In either case, the gun cannot fire until the trigger is all the way back. Both methods are effective drop safeties so that all chambers may be loaded. Some miscellaneous revolver notes. Keep your fingers away from the front of the cylinder when firing. The bullet jumps this gap. It's very small, but it's there. It jumps the gap from the cylinder to the barrel. When it does, hot gases explode out from behind it as the bullet passes through. This reduces recoil, but it's bad for fingers or anything else that would be up in that vicinity. It also can create a ring around the chamber openings. That can be scrubbed away when you're cleaning the gun, but it really isn't harmful if you just ignore it. While many revolvers are light and small enough to carry in a pocket, always use a holster that's designed for that. Pocket debris can easily get into the cylinder lock mechanism that I showed you earlier and really mess it up. Be careful when cleaning. Depending on the rotation direction of the cylinder, the shaft through the cradle that supports it, the cradle here, actually can be tightened in the opposite direction than expected. You may think you're tightening it when you're cleaning the gun, but you're actually loosening it. When you loosen it, it actually lengthens this shaft that goes from here all the way to here, which is part of the locking mechanism when you close the cylinder. And if you increase the length too much by doing that, at some point it will lock that mechanism tight. Ask me how I know. So, what to get? I hesitate to offer suggestions as there are many good quality options out there at reasonable prices. But the video is about offering advice, so here goes. As a new shooter, keep it simple. Keep it true. Stay away from guns with unusual characteristics like a barrel in the center instead of on top, or one that shoots both normal cartridges and shotgun shells. Keep it simple. Stay away from off-brands. They may be fine or not, but how can you be expected to know? Plus, while customer service can vary all over the map, a larger company with more resources may offer a smoother operation should that need arise. Stay away from non-traditional calibers. Stick with .38 Special. .45 Long Colt is a cartridge that's used in cowboy guns. .45 ACP is used in semi-autos, but is not a common revolver round. .44 Magnums are powerful, but they're just too much to handle for the average user. .44 Specials have less kick, but they aren't wildly popular and ammunition is more expensive. 9mm, great for semi-autos, but rarely used in revolvers. Fewer shooters mean few gun choices. 22s are great for plinking, but most new users are looking for some level of self-protection capability, and that really isn't their strong suit. My choice is the .38 Special, as noted above. Don't be concerned over the term special. There have been many different .38 caliber versions over time. Smith & Wesson actually developed the .38 Special cartridge for use in its military and police model way back in 1902. Adopted by both military and police, it kind of became the standard issue caliber in most U.S. law enforcement agencies from the 20s all the way through to the 90s. It works, and is arguably the most popular revolver caliber in production. This increases choices and lowers prices. Now, I would prefer a gun that's rated for +P ammunition. That just means it is made to handle higher pressures than normal, and since many self-defense rounds use higher pressures, having a gun with that ability is a plus. You can still shoot regular range ammo in a gun that's rated for +P. .357 Magnum, another powerful gun. It's built around the .38 caliber projectile, but I definitely do not recommend shooting one on a casual basis. But again, a .357 Magnum can use .38 Special ammo, and the Plus P versions with no problem. So if I saw one at a good price, I wouldn't say no. In summary, revolvers are simple to use. They're safe to handle. They're ideal for personal defense, especially when extensive training is not really expected. However, their very simplicity means they can be misused by accident or intent by others if left unguarded. It's your gun. You're responsible for how it gets used or misused. Thanks for watching. Shoot safe and keep your gun safe too.